they finish they submit their graduation project. It's about a big port. We spoke a little bit about it last night, you and I, and then there's an exhibition coming up. So very, very much at the moment we are having conversations around graphic communication, I guess, and what's powerful and what's working on the page, etc. And as you as you've been nominated into this Young Gun thing, which you might tell us a little bit about, which would be kind of fun to hear about. I thought it would be terrific to hear from you and what you're working on and about some of the things we talked about last night. So I might hand over to you. Do you want to give us a bit of an intro, Joseph Dennis?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share.
Joseph's in Fremantle, just outside
yes.
of Perth. And tell us who you work with and who you are.
Yes. Okay. So I'm calling this a case for a case study because I kind of thought that was funny. But so I'm Joseph Dennis. I work out of Walyalup, Fremantle, which is a little bit south of Perth, which is a port city. And I'm a brand designer, type designer, and art director. Simply that means I'm a graphic designer, and sort of person who specializes in visual communication. But when you get, obviously, like but like when you get into the area of design, you realize there's so many little niches that you can occupy. And so this is sort of where I've ended up. I will design logos, I will design whole brand systems, and sort of put together, I guess, all the ingredients that someone might need to be able to roll out branded collateral. And I also have recently, over the past few years, started my own type design practice, which is called Swim, which brings me to what I'm doing at the moment, which is, I guess I have one of those classic kind of like day job, night job things. Whereas by day I work for a Sydney branding agency called For the People. So I work remote out of this little office I'm in Fremantle. And then when I have energy and time and an idea, I work under the name Swim, which stands for See What I Mean. And I will design typefaces, and is mainly actually called Swim because I used to be a swim teacher and I thought it was a cool word. I've since regretted it because it's got an S in it and it just makes designing logos and everything very annoying constantly. So what I thought I would do today is take you through 3 case studies of projects that I've worked on over the past few years. One from For the People, which is a really recent piece, one that I did myself as Swim, and one that I did at my previous job for Block, which was a Perth branding agency. And then dotted throughout that, I've got some little black slides, which are the actual takeaways that I'd like you to have from this presentation. So the first job that I'd like to talk about was done while I was at Block, and it was the city of Mandurah. So I'm not sure what the East Coast equivalent would be, but it's sort of outside of the main cities. It's growing. They catch a lot of crabs. It's on the edge of like there's like estuaries coming out, and it's another port city that's south of Perth, and so this is where it takes me into my first sort of, I guess, like recommendation when you're presenting your work, when you're looking at building a presentation, building a deck, or looking at structuring anything, would be never use default. And as you'd know, when you look into any design software, there's always a default setting, whether it's even as simple as, should I use a white background? And so I think something that is really great to consider every time you're doing anything is, what's the initial impression I want to make and how do I get there? And so everything is a choice that should be deliberately made. And so the main 3 points I'd say that would be good to focus on there is picking a color palette. I've chosen gray, white, and black for this. a typeface, and shapes. And so if you're looking at what I'd analyze this presentation, if you're looking at this, I've chosen black, white, gray, and I guess this green, because as you'll probably notice, if you ever look into a lot of architecture and design websites, their backgrounds are predominantly white or black. And this is because it's all about showing off photography, it's showing about imagery, and it's showing design. And they are the colors that work really nicely and interfere the least with the like message of that photography. Off-white and a light gray are also used quite nicely. And so it really depends what the look is you want and how you're going to use it. So I've structured this. We've got our chapter headings in the gray, so you know where you're at. We've got white, which is where I'm showing work. And we have black for when I want you to kind of go, oh, cool, we're now talking about the sort of like, we're jumping out of the presentation into some tips and recommendations. So we have type, which is Helvetica New. I chose this today because I thought architects love Helvetica. If you look into a lot of, like if you just Google architecture logos, there's already this world of things that kind of look and feel like that. And I kind of wanted to find a mid-ground between graphic design and architecture, which kind of comes into minimal, simple, really functional, considered, and in this case, Helvetica. And then shapes. I think we forget that the rectangle and the square are a shape that's a choice because they are so default. So making sure that you're like, do I want sharp corners? Am I doing something that should have rounded corners and feel a bit softer and gentler? Do I rotate things so that they feel a little bit like a kid put them together? Are we designing like a playground or spaces that are more to do with like diversity of people, or like how do we bring those themes in through just simply shape, type, and color? And as a bit of a demonstration, I've switched up the the type, the shapes, and the color to just kind of show you what a different look would be, and how wrong it can immediately feel if you kind of don't get it right. And I think looking at this, the case for a case study, City of Mandurah, it immediately feels like it should say the case for the missing emerald, Sherlock Holmes, or something like that. It feels like it's the cover of a hardcover classic book. And so making sure that you're already aware that everything already belongs to a world. It already exists. There are established visual languages that you can borrow from and copy. And so if you want it to feel like it's from a certain world, go and look at what does that world look like? What do art galleries look like? What do their websites look like? If you go to something like the Sydney Opera House website, it's got nice bold type. It's very clear, but it's also very colorful because it represents the arts. And so making sure that you're looking and borrowing from the right places so that when someone quickly looks at your work, they understand what world you're coming from, and it can provide like a great context for your idea. All right, so actually getting into the case study. So City of Mandurah used to look like this. It's got gulls because it's coastal. It's got water in the logo. City of is really tiny. And there was a lot of other stuff going on. So what came out of the initial brand strategy phase? So we work with lots of teams, and I'm not. So what came consultation was this idea that Mandurah is woven by waterways because it's got so many estuaries coming together. And so this was the logo that we came up with. It's simply kind of got this feeling of ripples, and there's a little bit of water kind of feel to it as well. That I could be cheating, and because it's blue, it feels a bit like water. And there's this, because it's a city and because the city has people, any kind of theme of connection and coming together is always really positive. The Noongar name, which is the Aboriginal people of the area, is Manjagurup, which means meeting place of the heart. And that also kind of came into that like togetherness and meeting idea. And further from that, we we consulted and found and sort of based the color palette that we used, not only just from pulling from the land and making sure we had colors of the ocean and colors of the estuaries and colors of the trees, and it was all about as well theming them and grouping them into the 6 Noongar seasons. So from like hot and dry to the flowering to in between with cold and wet. So making sure there's a reason for everything in your project is a really good idea as well, to make sure that you're not doing too much as just, here's my typeface, it works. Here's my color palettes. Here's my color palette. This is the reason I've got it. And this is how it looks. And so then you move into shape and you go, okay, so we've got these reasons for color. What system out beyond the logo? So it was looking at creating almost these icons or illustrative pictograms for waterways, or the Woggle Mudgett, the rainbow serpent that sort of came down from the hills and carved out the estuaries, and then the seabird infrastructure, our people, meeting place, and they become more or less abstract as we go. And this is sort of another way of showing that. So you can kind of show technical side of the idea. So this is almost the back end. This is the document that I wrote that was like 150 pages or something ridiculous that explains to people how to use this system. But when you're putting together a case study, you don't really want someone to have to read that whole 150 pages. So it can be good to just explain in a way that's easier. And so this was originally, I couldn't find it to present it to you today, but I had all these stills. But it's sort of looking at, it started with this square in the middle, and it showed all of the different shapes coming into that square, white square in the middle, and being able to sort of tell that story. So we have the rainbow serpent coming through the square in the middle. We have the seabirds, we have the gulls, we have the waves, the waterways coming together, and their sort of house meeting place of that like coastal shack. And so sometimes it can be really good to illustrate those ideas rather than sort of get a bit too caught up in all the work you've done previously. You almost have a new audience for your presentation than you did for your idea. And then it comes into like, we've put together all these ingredients. How do they come together? And so here's a little bit of a demonstration of how that could come into like a pull-up banner, which cities do a lot. And as we're presenting, a great one to do that you've probably heard a lot is do less. As a general rule, and I'll probably break this as we go, but always strive to only have one new idea per slide. So you don't want someone to be completely lost. You want each new slide to sort of build a bit on the last one each time you're adding to that idea. So we've already seen the shapes. We've sort of seen how they start to come together. And now I'm showing you what I think the signage might look like under this system, with the different shapes building out, and blue is always used for the wayfinding, and everything else is kind of just indicating and being a bit fun and providing texture. And then how it all comes together in the end, we've got probably no new ideas on this page, but just showing how that kind of color comes together and type, and sort of how cohesive it feels. And what I wanted to do here was just include a little snapshot of like what the case study could have been. We could have just gone through every single page of this document that explains everything in detail, but making sure that the bits you're talking about are really important to the audience of the case study, like not the idea. So when you're presenting, making sure what are they going to want to know? What are the bits that are going to interest them now? And if they really want to know more, they'll ask questions. And because I know all of the background and I know everything that I'm talking about, I could answer that for them. And so there are things you can say for your question portion of the presentation and stuff as well. Going kind of indicating, I know what I'm talking about, so I've done this, and then the backup can come later. And being consistent. So as you saw going through that case study, establishing that visual language and using those cues and applying it consistently makes it all feel like it belongs and it kind of helps it all feel like it makes sense, which is what you want. You don't want anyone lost, essentially. So the third, it's the second case study, but it's the third chapter. I probably numbered these badly. The third one is a Malaysian internet company called Time. So they came to us at For the People, and it was all about shifting from being this company that was a bit challenger internet company in Malaysia. So they're not your kind of corporate, more governmenty Telstra that has to feel really, really trustworthy and like more conservative. It's more about they were this kind of the fastest in Malaysia. They had this line, "You get the rocket, we do the science," which sort of makes sense. And everything was a picture of someone smiling at a computer, because the internet is hilarious, I think. And so it was all like gradients and lasers, and it was all about speed. But their business was shifting because for different reasons, they're no longer going to be able to hinge their entire business on speed. And they've been improving in like customer service, speed of like setup. You can get like same day internet over there, which to me is insane. Because here getting internet is just the biggest struggle. But they needed to move away from speed and become about personality and about being friendly and approachable. And so this was the logo that we came up with for them. So it's a great example of how to use animation to do the talking for you, because I don't think I really need to say anything. But I will say that like things being used here is to show the friendliness, it bounces. Like all the letters kind of bounce in and they're fun. And then obviously I'm drawing attention to the clock in time and the hands by just using the animation and the intro. But this is a very neat solution, and we kind of loved working with the word time, which is an absolute gift. So using the animation and motion, if you can, is a really fantastic way of letting your idea speak for itself, which I think is kind of the aim with anything. Pix rule, there's an order people will read your layout in, and it never begins long passages of text. So animation can help shortcut it. Just using a picture can help shortcut it. People will typically read from, it's much like you'd know when you're trying to design a space, and you will kind of understand how people or groups of people will move through that space. You could design a space that is designed to get people through it really quickly, like fire exits and stuff, or you could design a space that is designed for people to dwell in and stay for ages and wander around. And there are different ways you would do that. It's the same with a page, except I understand how it works on a page and not like in the real world. But it's typically top left to bottom right. This is a really easy page to understand because also size matters. And if it's really big, people are going to read it first. Being really brief and going Pix rule, people will read it and be like, what? And then you can explain it with your secondary text. And then the footer is basically designed to be ignored. It's unimportant. You don't really need it, but it's there all the time. It's a little bit like when you're wandering around a building and you want to find the toilets, you kind of know where to look for a toilet sign. It's a bit like that's where you put your page numbers. Is you don't want them to distract, but you want them to be predictable in where they are so that if someone needs it, they can find it. Another thing I'd say is never hide a good idea in a passage of text. So if you've got a good idea that you're proud of, that you want people to understand as part of your project, you really want to hero it. So give it an extra slide, give it a big heading, make sure you've got a visual for it as well. So Time to get through it is a really expressive brand. The whole idea of it, sort of outside of the logo, was that if we're going to try and talk about how people use the internet, I think we need to do away with these images of people on laptops, because everything is the internet now. It's like if you're listening to music, it's the internet. If you bought something or you're wearing clothes, you probably bought them on the internet. I think thinking that that's different, and that a slow internet or a bad internet connection wouldn't impact like every area of your day, is sort of, we've moved to that area now where it's everywhere. So we wanted to show how people actually use the internet, which is just everyday life, and be really fun and almost silly and irreverent with that. So a way to explain the overall system, because it is quite complicated in the end, was to animate it. So if you're looking at this, the main thing I want you to take away is that stuff happens inside type. So there's words, stuff's typed out, and there's fun stuff inside it. So it almost represents time is the main typeface, and we just have all of this life happening inside of it. If you stay and read everything, which you don't even really need to for this to kind of deliver the message I need it to, there's a system about expressing the infinite eclecticism of the internet. It starts with a lot of words and not much time, and you can type out the typeface and change letters. And then if you've got a lot of time and not many words, you can spend the time illustrating inside the typeface. And you don't need to necessarily animate to that degree. What I find is really effective is just jumping between frames as well. So just to show that kind of eclecticism and everything changing, it can be really simple. And this is just a few slides in InDesign that I then made a GIF out of. So it can be really simple, and you can still deliver those ideas. And you can still sort of, in different ways, show that you've got this sort of customizable typeface where you can change all different letters within it. And then the second part says illustration. And so, I mean, this is a huge branding project that was actually a really hard case study to put together and be really clear about. But they're quite a fun brand. So they have headlines like "Game Without the Lag," or "Time to Switch," or "Upgrade to our basic plan," and have that kind of confidence of saying that whatever they're on, our basic plan is better. And they're quite funny like that, and they can deliver as well. And so we got local illustrators to illustrate really weird scenarios. And as you can see, they're not particularly related to the internet. There's one with a computer, but it's a merman in a glass. So I think it's like weird enough to not go too hard in the internet area. And so these became the kind of tone for them, and just having a lot of fun with it. And so, like, for example, when we were talking about it, we wanted one that could represent online shopping. That's the guy in the shopping cart, but it's also got handles like he's racing it. So we were just trying to make sure there was always this element of odd fun and whimsy. I think starting simple with when you're explaining any idea is really good. I hope I've done it with this one, even though it is a difficult one for me to explain. But starting simple, starting out with by explaining the brief is always the best way, and just building on your elements. So we've kind of gone through building a foundation, and you introduce different pieces before revealing the outcome. So we've looked at the type, we've kind of seen how the color works, we've looked at the illustration, and now we sort of start to see how that comes together. So we're always replacing a letter with illustration, whether that's posters about the internet, about things you do on it, like data, speed, talk. Whether it's log in, tune out, internet plans that are so intuitive you'll never have to think about them again. Time for trouble-free internet. And just now you can kind of see how everything comes together, where that logo fits, where everything all comes together. And you kind of want this to feel like, oh yeah, of course it would end up there. Time to make the internet yours. And this was a really fun project to work on, particularly I think because the client was so great. And so on board for doing something completely weird for an internet company that has so many customers and is They're not small either. It's a little bit maybe like Optus, I think, might be an equivalent. All right, so last case study, done for time, oh good, is one that I did a few years ago for swim, so it's much more typographic based. And what I wanted to talk about here was this idea of not trying to surprise your audience. Obviously, being surprised by the solution to a problem is really lovely, and you want to delight and you want to interest, but it's almost about subverting expectations in that rather than making something really surprising. So you almost want your solution to feel obvious or inevitable as you're stepping through it, because you want it to feel complete and together. And so so this is it's called Till Death, based off the line, "Till death do us part," and it's for a wedding filmmaker and director who obviously makes wedding films. And if you kind of think immediately about, the surprising element is if you immediately think about weddings, you kind of think white dress, tuxedo, flowers. You might think church. You might think it's really pretty, it's beautiful, there's a sunset photo shoot. It's kind of maybe delicate and sophisticated and expensive looking. And in that regard, I hope that if I've set you up like that, then the solution's surprising. But there are written components to what you will do, and how you will talk is almost kind of that written component. So this is an excerpt from the bit of text that I write before this case study that hopefully means that and I'll read it out to you, but hopefully at the end of it, and then when I show you the brand, you kind of go, oh yeah, cool. I was kind of expecting something like that. So today, which was 2019, there are so many filmmakers making incredible work, creating new niches and styles, that alternative is no longer alternative. It's the norm. From young punk brand to industry leader, Till Death needed an identity that stayed true to their values and style, while communicating their maturity and level of craft. The brand centers around storytelling, beginning with the logo, a bespoke typeface with fine ligatures that symbolize love and human connection. The name breaks apart to allow a story to be told within, enriching its meaning and allowing for fun, creative, and beautiful stories to be told. The exhibition of the films brings the party, utilizing motion and energy to create an identity that is sophisticated, edgy as ever, and fucking fun. And for me, one of the important parts is kind of like swearing at the end and going like, this is kind of a party brand, a little bit. There's connection, but we've talked about young punk brand, there's storytelling, party, edgy. You want to sort of use language to set that up. And so this is what the brand looks like. It's sort of the photography, the imagery is much more, you're there, you're in it. That's kind of her style, is that she goes there and is amongst it. The type really borrows from, like, if you saw the word Dracula in that typeface, it would kind of feel right, or anything Halloweenish. It feels a bit dark. It feels a bit gothic. And then as we go in, it's looking at describing that. And so Till Death is a boutique production company specializing in wedding films, portraits, and short documentary content, which is a really nice and normal way of describing that. But then on the website, she also describes her work as, I do weddings, portraits, and cool shit. And so everything's got this kind of alternate on its head, and there's a really strong use of language amongst that storytelling as well. And I think consistency of that is really important for an idea. So with that Till Death, that logo, it kind of then breaks apart and it becomes this way of telling a story in an interesting way. And so this is one of the pieces we wrote that was also telling the story of like meeting the person you'll eventually marry. So it's till the last first kiss, till dinner, till drinks, till your place or mine, till 2 takeaway flat whites, till the next time, till the time after that, till death. And so being able to link in that brand feel, that kind of irreverence, a bit of the humor of like going, yeah, these people have flat whites. Like I think as well, making sure that you're looking at this audience and going, it's not all about, like these aren't, my point is dress appropriately. Like these aren't really cheap films. People that get wedding films done have already hired a photographer. So it's an additional cost. This is almost an expensive thing that you don't need, but is lovely. So people that can afford it want it. So you don't have to be, you can price yourself and look expensive. And that comes under, like me choosing the fonts and the colors for this presentation. You want to exist in the world that you want to show up in. And so dressing appropriately here is thinking about your audience and tailoring your message and the way you deliver it to them. So whether that's the language, whether that's the color. So here in this brand with Till Death, it's just black, white, and then the really rich imagery. And so it also comes down to, we've used these typefaces. There's this really strong all capitals, really simple, bold typeface. There's the Till Death that has a really kind of black letter Gothic feel. But part of this brand was about upping the level of sophistication and fun and a little bit of glamour. And so what we wanted to do was borrow from almost this world of fashion as well, and all kind of like beauty brands. And so, but then subvert it again. So the typeface you see there that says the Till Espresso Martini, Till Espresso Martinis, Till Shoeies, Till the last bus back to town, Till Kick-Ons, Till the end, Till death, is like this weird, flowy, drippy typeface that has a really kind of luxurious feel because of its gloopiness, I think. And it also has this really odd energy that feels really broken up. And so having this, being able to still up your level of sophistication, she could raise her prices, she could exist in a kind of higher price bracket, but still make sure there was this element of that, like, but I'm different, but I've got this punk kind of feel to me. I do things differently. So making sure that that didn't die with like what the previous brand was like lo-fi zine kind of look, all ripped and very Sex Pistols. And then like adding to that, looking at how that type works out in this series of posters we made that were almost these kind of like declarations of love, but between her and her client rather than her client and their partner. So it's like you and me, ride or die. I would die for you till the end. And just having a lot of fun with that like over commitment and that really strong language. And then lastly, just looking at, there's always these little details that you can make sure your idea flows into. And so one that I think is really nice here on the website is that it was all about trying to make sure that there's this feeling of her and her work, and that she's not, and that she does things kind of differently and with energy and with attitude. And so she could have written contact. It could have been like about, work, contact on the page, but she's written ethos, work, and holler. And so you click that and you go through to the email. And I think making sure that you are considering every sort of part of the way you speak and the way you look, if you can, is a really nice way to make everything fit together and feel really cohesive, which is kind of one of the biggest points when designing, is to make sure everything fits together, feels of the right world, and speaks to the right people. Cool. Questions? Felt like I spoke really fast, but I got in under time, so I'm pretty proud of that.
You did super well. Questions, anyone?
That's amazing.
Nice.
Or when building like a slide deck, where's a good place to start up front? Like you've obviously had these clients come to you with the ideas. Do you go and I don't know, looked at the shapes first or the typeface, or is it more what's out there that currently responds to what they want trying to get?
I think it can be, the annoying answer is it's always different, but the helpful answer hopefully is I look at a lot of stuff. So a really easy place to go is like Pinterest or just Googling the world that client's in. So for example, with the wedding one, I looked at a lot of other wedding photographers that were out there, and a lot of them, because wedding photographers exist on their own and they run their own business, they've often designed their own logos. So you quickly go, oh, there's not really great examples there. And you go, okay, maybe I'll look at directors. Like, what about film directors? Do they have logos, or production companies? And you kind of sort of explore different aesthetics as you go and start to then borrow from those. So with that one, each little idea is almost borrowed from a different place. But I think that one always started with, we know this attitude needs to feel really strong and be quite different. And so it can help to look at everything else and go, we want to fit within it, but we also need to make sure it looks different. And there's this kind of aesthetic there that I think works really well. And I showed a lot of ideas, and that was the one that was picked, but they all in different ways delivered on, this is different and strong. When building a presentation, I would kind of look at, do you want the typeface to be a really interesting part of the presentation? Does it need to communicate something? Or can it be like the typeface I used for mine, like Helvetica, which is no one really notices it. Everyone's very familiar with it, so it falls to the background quite quickly, and you can just get on and read the content. A good example of that would be if you're doing anything that needs to feel like it's for kids. People borrow from the world of kids and play and like scrapbooking and gluing stuff together and cutting stuff out. So if you did it for kids, you might rotate words, you might put random shapes or badly cut out shapes or patterns on, and like almost too many colors. And so you can start to look at who's it for, and who's it about, and how can we kind of communicate that.
Cool, thanks, Jake.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
The animations that you made, Joseph, were they pretty much just like the GIFs that you do? You get like a screenshot, and then you said you used InDesign for some of them, but some of them looks like they were much more advanced than that.
Yeah.
But I can't remember if you spoke about it more, but were they things that you used a specific program for, or like what other people used?
Yeah, so there's a really big combination. So some of them were just like, I made the slides in InDesign, and then I made a new page and just changed a couple of things, which is really great for like cutting between text or adding things. Then a few of them were me using After Effects, which is the Adobe piece of software, and that's really good for like getting proper motion. So the ones of time where there's like those slides going past with the different words on, that was After Effects, and you kind of build each bit and you move it. And then the animation of all of the characters was done by a proper animation studio called Never Sit Still in Sydney, who are absolutely fantastic, and they do like every kind of animation. So they do like 3D, cell animation, like frame by frame, everything. So there's a big combination, but to kind of communicate the idea, it's very much, I think it can be pretty simple.
No, that's good to know. So Patrick, if we were wanting to do similar things, like hypothetically outsourcing stuff like that, getting GIFs and cartoons and stuff, is that...
What's the question? Is that allowed?
Yeah. No, but like, you know how you get those generic ones on like GIF and stuff?
I'd say explore. I'd say
Explore.
play. I'd say, you know.
Because they're like pretty hard to make
Yeah.
individually.
Go for it. Be real.
Cool.
Be real.
Be radical.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
Joe's on.
One other question. So for us, we're working towards this final presentation. How many sort of colors, fonts, shapes is a good sort of rule of thumb to work off? Obviously, there's no hard and fast rule.
It's always good to establish enough kind of colors in a presentation to be able to have a light background, a dark background, and like a medium background. So a lot of like even I think probably all of those brands except for Till Death, which is just black and white, so there's no medium. Like Time would have had, there's black for the dark background, there's white for the light, and there's like the pink or the blue or the purple for this medium. And in my presentation, I used gray as the medium. So it gives you this flexibility of, let's say if you had black, white, and red, you can put black and white together, you can put white on red, you can put black on red. You've got a nice flexibility, but you have a really like consistent feel all the way through. You could add, your like light doesn't have to be white. It could be off-white or pastel, or the dark could be like a deep navy blue. But having that kind of starting with what the functionality of the color is can kind of help with that. So this is my background that I put images on. This is my background that I put chapter headings on, and this is my cover page. Can be a kind of good way of sort of starting to build a color palette.
Hey, I've got a final question. Sort of, kind of. Thanks, Joseph. Super to see your work. Certainly, I did want to ask you about. So we've got some drilling going on in the background about the Young Guns. Just tell us about the Young Guns scenario. What's that about?
Okay. So it's probably the same in architecture, but there's just a lot of awards and stuff like that you can enter. And a lot of them are very much about like connecting students to industry and stuff like that. And Young Guns is a global one run out of New York, I think, that is about not students, but like young professionals. So people that are like under 30, I think it is, entering a portfolio of work, and then it gets judged and you become like part of the class of, you know, like 2022 or whatever, which is like 20 people worldwide, and it's insane. And a lot of people then are referred to later as like, you are the class of something. But recently I entered because my boss at work, who actually used to be an architect and then moved to graphic design, he was like, you should enter. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I forgot about it. And then of course did the kind of like stay up really late, do all of the work, enter, and got named as a finalist recently, which was really, really cool, which is like, I think 100 people worldwide, which is really awesome. With, I think, a bunch of these projects, which was cool. And then there's like a big thing that you find out, I think, in a few weeks, but I'm pretty much telling myself this is as far as I go and being really happy with being a finalist because I think it's pretty sick. But yeah.
Make the most of it. Congratulations, It's pretty awesome. Hey, before we finish, I did want to, Joseph, you talked, since I've known you, it's been a while, you know, I've seen you seem to have an amazing capacity to sort of push an idea. So just to speak across design disciplines, I suppose, from graphic design to landscape architecture, you know, I do feel, you know, there's a question in here, when is a good decision, I guess. And I feel like I'm sometimes I'm saying things like, oh, you know, looking at I guess what I call the fundamental assets or something. There's a multifunctionality that sort of can answer a kind of quandary for you. And I was hearing you talk, and I know you do a lot of sort of doodling and drawing and what I'd call play, I suppose. In whenever I've seen you design things and you used to write music, etc., I felt there was lots of books and journals and, you know, a lot of groundwork. So I guess the question is, and I heard you say the words, you know, different and strong. You know, like, do you think there's how do you make a design decision? Which is the best idea, so to speak?
you have to have enough ideas that you can compare them. I think like you can't ever have an idea and be like, this is good, because you're probably just lucky if you're right, and you're lazy if you're right as well. So I think it's always about having as many ideas and iterating as you possible, like as much as you can. And so that time logo that feels kind of simple with the hands of the clock in, like we did definitely over 100 versions, definitely easy. And a lot of them were that same kind of idea that we worked out, where you were kind of like, I know there's a way of making a dot on the I and the T, the hands of a clock, and sort of hiding it in there, and then patting myself on the back because it's a classic logo idea. And we did so many versions of just that idea. We did so many versions of completely different ideas. And then like looked at them all and went, this one's the strongest because of this. And then the conversation wasn't like, is this a good idea? It was like, is this the best idea of these? So if you've done enough, if you've done 100 things, this was a team effort. This wasn't just me doing 100. But if you're looking at that and discussing it, the conversation becomes easier because you're no longer going, have I done enough? You're going, which one of these that I have done is the best and why? And then it becomes easier, and you can get other people involved, and you can go, if I show you these 3 things, which one says to you friendly more? And I think asking other people is really good, but making sure you're asking the right questions. So you don't just go, which one's better, to like your mum. You might ask a more direct question, like which one feels friendly? Which one feels, do any of these feel like a bank, or that kind of thing? So making sure that you know what you want to find out is really good, but mainly just lots of ideas.
I've seen you do that on Instagram very well, like throw it out to your audience and say, what does everyone like? Vote on this, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's a fun way of doing it.
Yeah,
I did do one time that was, I was like, what if you did this? And that was my caption. And that someone just responded, why would you? And I was like, oh, you're bringing the wrong energy. The wrong energy. It was like, oh, I was like, because.
Just because you can. Joseph Dennis, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Hey, super. We will reflect on that. Hey, have a great day in Fremantle.
Will do. Have a great day where you all are, which seems to be everywhere. Sweet. Have a good one. Thank you.
Bye.